Do you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth?
Quiet, numbskulls, I'm broadcasting.
Can we get serious now?
One thing that did happen during the 60s was some music of an unusual or experimental nature did get recorded and did get released. Now look at who the executives were in those companies at those times. Not hip young guys. These were cigar-chomping old guys who looked at the product that came and said, I don't know. Who knows what it is? Record it, stick it out. If it sells, all right. We were better off with those guys than we are now with the supposedly hip young executives who are making the decisions of what people should see and hear in the marketplace.
Success in the music business begins with a dream, a vision. This podcast will give you, the listener, the insight and tools to turn that vision into a reality. Meet the industry professionals who work day by day behind the scenes, helping to make those dreams come true. Welcome to the business side of music.
In the studio today, guest co-host Sean Giovanni's with us.
What's happening?
Hey,
glad to be here.
Glad you could be here. And we're using your studio today.
Yeah.
This is cool. The Record Shop.
Absolutely.
In Laverne, Tennessee. And a special guest you set up for us. Glad to have him here, Paul Andrews.
Good morning.
With
hey guys.
DPA Microphones.
How are we?
We're
Glad
doing
to
good.
be here.
And we're using DPA microphones.
That's right.
So this has worked out really well. We had a little conversation before we started. You're originally from Colorado. You moved to Tennessee about a year and a half ago.
Yes.
And set up shop here.
Right.
How long have you been with DPA?
On and off for probably 8 or 9 years now. Officially full-time with them for about 2. They used me for contract work for several years before that when I had the studio in Colorado.
Yeah. So what's your background? Were you a musician or a tech or?
Started out playing classical guitar and studied that through college, and then had the opportunity to work at A&amp Records out in California.
Very nice.
This goes back to the early 90s. I'll date myself a little bit there.
Yeah.
But
what were some of the projects you worked on there?
Oh my goodness. I think the first project that I got to be involved with was a Soundgarden project. I then had a little bit of involvement with Aerosmith when they came through. There was Patti Smythe. There was all sorts of fun people that were rolling through, and being the newbie on the block with the studio, you know, your involvement varied depending on where you were, but it was a great experience.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So DPA Mics, you came on board with them.
Yes.
The microphone market, and Sean and I are going to talk about that a little later on in a separate piece, or a couple separate pieces, I guess. The microphone market, for lack of better words, it's quite noisy because there's a lot of them out there. There's a lot of different brands.
Yes, there are.
And so, you know, kind of, we had this conversation with some folks with Shure microphones a while back about different microphones for different projects, different whatever it is that you're going to use it for. And so when we talk about DPA microphones, what sets you apart from everybody else?
So we originally came from another Danish company called B&K, or Brüel & Carr. They are primarily a testing and measurement microphone company. When you think about testing and measurement microphones, what has to happen within that is the microphone needs to maintain a very linear response, something that is very, very flat. It doesn't embark any type of character into the microphone whatsoever, because these guys who are using them for really critical applications can't have, you know, a footprint from the microphone be part of the end test result. Otherwise, it's skewing the result. Right? So the accuracy has to be there. It was from that mindset that DPA came into the audio industry as we think about it typically, and we're keeping that. We're saying we don't build microphones for specific purposes. We build a microphone that's going to capture the source, whatever that source is, as accurately as we possibly can. So that way it gives the end user the ultimate flexibility in how they want to shape the sound after the fact.
So how long has DPA been manufacturing microphones in that aspect?
About 30 years now, actually.
So it's a relatively new market brand out there.
Yeah, I guess you could call it that. B&K has been around for a long time.
But the audio world is changing extensively too, not only in live applications, you know, but Sean can testify in the recording studio aspect.
Right.
We're getting a lot more sensitive with our ears and what we're listening to, in spite of the earbuds. And the way we record is a lot different than the way we recorded 10, 15, 20 years ago. Do you agree?
Yes, I do.
I mean, not only are we in a digital world now from the old analog days, but just the creativity, I think, has expanded so much too. I know that in pop music, there seems to be a lot of one-note songs out there, but there is just some really amazing creative artistry coming out of the music, at least what I'm listening to. So when I was walking into the studio today, getting ready for the show, you were playing some music in the background, some great jazz, I have to say. Really and we were talking about how that was really recorded, I guess, for lack of better terms, in the raw.
It was.
You just placed microphones in the room.
Right.
And it was 4 session players in Montreal, Canada.
Yes.
How did that come about?
So this was at a studio called Planet Studios, like you said, there in Montreal. This was an event that was set up by a distributor up there called Gear Audio. They're great supporters of us and really do a nice job all throughout Canada. They had organized musicians to come in. They booked the time in the studio, and me and this guy named Danny basically, had free reign of the place, which was super fun. What we ultimately ended up doing was bringing in, as you mentioned, 4 different players, a piano player, drums, upright bass, and a vocalist. And we had one large room to work within. And we're like, you know what? This is exactly what we want. We've got some gobos, some things to start to isolate, but at the same time, we're going to be capturing the bleed, and that's really what we were after, because of the fact that this was going to be a 100% DPA session across the board, everything live at the same time, so it was a performance.
Let's talk about the microphones.
Yeah.
Which microphones did you use on which instrumentation?
Sure. So the drums, I had set it up where the kick drum itself, we'll start there, 2011C on the inside of the kick, 4099 on the outside of the kick, which is kind of fun. With that, I actually used the violin and the viola mount to grab the rim on the outside of the kick drum there to mount that microphone, which is really neat. So, little side note, when you think about DPA, Danish Pro Audio, them being in Denmark, everything handmade in Denmark, you also think Legos, because Legos are Denmark, and when you start to look at the amount of adapters and clips and things that we provide in order to mount microphones on instruments themselves, think outside the box, because you can build it.
I was going to think IKEA, but sure, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, 4099 on the outside of the kick. Snare, same configuration. 2011C on the snare top, 4099 on the snare bottom. 2011C on the hi-hat, 4099s on the 2 toms, 4011As for the 2 overheads, and then I had a center overhead, which was a 4041. But then I threw in this little trick. 2 of our miniature 5mm capsules, Omnis, the ones that we're actually speaking into now, the exact microphones. These are 4061s. A lot of people normally associate these as live mics or theatrical mics, whatever. But I've got these fun little goosenecks that I mounted these 2 mics in and around the drum kit. So you're capturing the kit from almost an inside perspective, which is really fun. Moving on to the upright bass, I ended up using 3 mics on this just for the sheer idea of let's solo these up and listen to the different characters, of what we're able to.
So they were positioned in perspective to what you were looking for with the bass.
Yes. So the first one is a 4018 VL capsule, which I had mounted onto the instrument on the back side of the bridge. And that VL capsule is actually the same capsule that goes in the de facto handheld microphone that we use on stage, because of its close linear operating distance of being only about 4 inches, which is really nice. So I'm not introducing any proximity effect there, which is awesome. Second one, 4099. And then the third microphone, again, a 4061, one of these miniature lav mics, I actually rolled up a small piece of foam and had it just kind of sticking out, and then I stuck the whole thing inside one of the F-holes.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
An Omni microphone on the inside. So there's 3 different perspectives that we were grabbing, right, just on the upright bass. Moving on to the piano, I used 2 4099s on the piano using the magnetic piano mounts. So there's no stands, which is fantastic with that. You can position those mics wherever you want. And I had it in kind of...
on top, on bottom?
Wherever, yeah. Because it's magnet mounted, anywhere the harp, the metal section,
right.
You can attach it to. And I kind of went in, I would say, maybe a wide ORTF position. And then I supplemented that with one of Planet Studios' older B&K mics that they just happened to pull out. And I was like, oh, we have to use this. And that was a 4007, which is an Omni. So I put that on a stand and I backed it up just to allow the instrument to develop a little bit more. And I wanted to also capture some of the room with that as well. Last but not least, vocals, the handheld de facto microphone with the 4018 VL capsule installed on that. She chose just to keep that in a stand, so she didn't want to hold on to it while she sang, which was great.
Yeah.
But
almost like a live application.
Exactly. Yeah. So the idea behind all of this was we take all these microphones, put them all through the same mic pre's, which was an SSL 4000E console. So there was no coloration in regards to, oh, let's use this microphone for this source, or this pre for this source, or this pre for that one. It's all the same across the board, right? No EQ, no filtering, nothing. We just adjusted gains, pushed up faders, panned a little bit. What I'll be able to let you guys listen to a little bit later on, or what you already have heard, is nothing more than a quick board mix. We did add a little bit of Lexicon 480L reverb just for fun, but that's the only processing that was taking place whatsoever.
Take a listen to what you accomplished there in the studio in Montreal.
Let's do it.
Quand il me prend dans ses bras, qu'il me parle tout bas, je vois la vie en rose. Il me dit des mots d'amour, des mots de tous les jours, et ça me fait quelque chose. Il est entré dans mon cœur une part de bonheur dont je connais la cause. C'est lui pour moi, moi pour lui dans la vie. Il me l'a dit, l'a juré pour la vie. Et dès que je l'aperçois, alors je sens en moi mon cœur qui bat. Parle tout bas, je vois la vie en rose. Il me dit des mots d'amour, des mots de tous les jours, et ça me fait quelque chose. Il est entré dans mon cœur une part de bonheur dont je connais la cause. C'est lui pour moi, moi pour lui dans la vie. Il me l'a dit, l'a juré pour la vie. Et dès que je l'aperçois, alors je sens en moi mon cœur qui bat.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Hey, it's Chris SD from Sync Songwriter. Imagine what it would be like getting your music into the latest TV shows, movies, or ads. Your songs would not only get exposure in front of millions of viewers, you'd get paid to do it and gain a reputation as the songwriter that you are. I've been showing songwriters, composers, and artists how to get their music into TV and film for over 15 years. Collectively, they have generated hundreds of thousands of dollars from licensing their music. Their music has been on networks such as HBO, Bravo, ABC, NBC, Netflix, and more. In films or trailers such as Predator, Annihilation, Christmas Chronicles, Professor Mac, and many others. So many songwriters upload their music to websites hoping to get discovered. Unfortunately, this almost never happens with the millions of songs out there competing for attention. I show you how to get your music heard by the people who can actually make it happen for you. When you start getting your music licensed, you automatically develop a reputation in the industry. This lets you get syncs over and over again. If you'd like to discover how to connect with the right people in music licensing, just click the Sync Songwriter logo on the Business Side of Music webpage, and I'll see you there.
Hi everyone, I'm Larry Butler, and I want to send you a free digital copy of my new book, The Singer-Songwriter Rulebook, 101 Ways to Help You Improve Your Chances of Success. That's right, everything you need to know to launch your career as a singer-songwriter, all based on my 40 years in the live performance arena, and believe me, I've seen it all. In my book, you'll find the 10 things you have to deal with before even thinking about becoming a singer-songwriter performer. You'll also learn about the 5 things every singer-songwriter can do this weekend to make their live show better. 5 things I can guarantee that you are not doing already. Plus, there's tips on songwriting and staging, photo and video shoots, publishing, merch, dozens of other topics. All written for people who don't particularly like to read. And again, it's free. Just go to the Business Side of Music website homepage and look for my book cover. Click on it, and a free digital copy of my book will be yours. I'm Larry Butler, and I approve of this message. Thanks.
You're listening to the Business Side of Music.
Back in the studio, co-host Sean Giovanni, Record Shop Recording Studios, with us today. Special guest Paul Andrews from DPA Microphones. Welcome back, guys. Let's talk about in the studio, and Sean came up with some ideas that we want to cover. And first of all, with microphone placement, and I think you said using your ears, not a microphone memory. Why don't you explain that first, and we'll have Paul expand on
the microphone memory term is actually a term that Paul came up with, and I loved that term because as an engineer, we can tend to do that, where we have a place that we found that a microphone sounds really great, and then and it's great to start there, but many times if we're in a rush, get a session set up, we just kind of put it there because that's where it looks like it's supposed to go, and that's where we saw our mentors put the mic, so that's where you put the mic, But once you have the opportunity to start experimenting with placement and really using your ears to listen, there's a lot of really interesting things that you can do with microphone placement, and also things that you can do that may not be necessarily like significantly alternative, but just subtle adjustments to pay attention to, instead of having to EQ something later, moving the microphone to capture it the way that you want. And I would have to credit Al Schmitt for me learning that. His whole philosophy around engineering is to capture it at the source the best way that you can. And if it doesn't sound right, switch the microphone or move the placement of the microphone. And to avoid the EQ and the fixing later and fix it in the mix. So when I read about his work and his philosophy early on in my career, I began applying that to what I did. And so my biggest tip for engineers would be just don't grab the EQ, go grab the mic, or switch out the mic if you have different options to choose from. Placement
is critical.
Absolutely.
Not just with drums, but with everything. Guitar amps, finding that sweet spot.
Right.
But I would think with different enclosures, different amps, the sweet spot's going to change anyway. So you need to be able to adjust to that transition.
Exactly. Every environment's going to be different, and every situation, from even the same studio, from day to day. The humidity is going to change. The temperature is going to be different in there. So like Sean said, it comes back to listening. Use your ears as your number one resource and find the areas that sound pleasing to you.
Do you think using your ears to listen is a lost art, either one of you? Because I kind of get the feeling these days, and I'm not knocking young producers, but I think sometimes, and the older ones have a tendency to do it too, just kind of phone it in. This worked before, we're just going to do this again, without really not only opening your mind, but literally, I call it ears of experience.
Nice, I like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, we have a lot of tools now that are very visual. The screen is visual.
Yeah.
We see the waveform, and we can get into the trap of paying attention to the screen and looking at the levels in the waveform as opposed to just closing your eyes and listening. And we also have plugins and software that is very visual, that shows us real-time frequency responses in an EQ. And then if you start basing things off of what you're seeing on this little waveform thing as opposed to what you're hearing with your ears, it can be a dangerous thing. But I wouldn't say that that's necessarily a bad thing, because that technology is amazing. It gives us the ability to look at things at incredible detail.
Right.
I just think it's very important to balance between the technology that we have and use it for what it's great for, but also rely on our ears.
Are you concerned it might become too sanitized or too vanilla if we rely on the visual aspect instead of using the oral aspect or using our ears?
I think it could, but I also think that there's places and different styles of music and different types of production for everything. So I just know what my approach and what I've found that works, and for other people something different might work. But I think there could be a strong argument that the best piece of gear that's in our studio
is our ears. Yeah,
absolutely.
Proximity effect. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Yeah. Well, I think Paul has some great ideas on that from a technical standpoint, as well as how the DPA microphones have worked really well with that. And then I can speak on my experience with them in that way.
Stepping back a little bit to the idea in and around microphone positions, and how do we capture the tonal characteristics of the source at the source, and how do we minimize the amount of potential work that we have after we step back into the control room or after we're back at the front of house position. It doesn't matter what the environment is. Thinking about that, especially with directional microphones. Now, proximity effect, as we know, it's only with directional microphones. We're not going to have that with our omnis, right?
Right.
The closer you move the microphone to the source, the more the bass is going to want to build up. The more we move the microphone away from the source, we can actually decrease the bass. So there's a point there in the middle where that microphone is going to exhibit the most linear frequency response, and this is established typically by the manufacturer saying, we've tested this microphone at this distance and this is where it is most linear or most flat. That linear operating distance, as long as we understand this, have a general concept in the back of our minds of saying, okay, this microphone is pretty flat at about a foot's distance away from the source. When I move it in, I'm going to start to increase the bass. Fine. So listen to that and increase or decrease the bass to taste.
Right.
And then you can do the exact same thing on the high end as well. It's like, all right, now I'm looking at the right amount of bass end, but it's a little bit too bright to me, right? So now we can take this microphone and we can start to take it off axis to the source. And now we are starting to manipulate the high end. We can start to roll off the highs. And this is something that I like to call free EQ, because we don't even pay for this, right? We didn't have to put it in a plug-in. We didn't have to buy a piece of gear. We're just simply moving a microphone. So to your point again, the art of positioning a microphone and how today's generations, I don't feel paid the same attention as engineers that I grew up and learned from in the past. It is a 101 concept, but it is an art that takes years to master. But once you have it down, you can walk back into the control room and you can be completely satisfied and be like, now I'm making creative decisions as opposed to corrective ones. And I like that.
I love that.
Absolutely.
That's a great analogy. It is. We've had this conversation with other engineers and producers is, garbage in, garbage out. It's almost impossible to fix it down the road once you have it in the mix.
Uh-huh.
And so what you capture in the beginning needs to be your best piece of work, not only from an artist perspective, but from an engineer and a producer perspective, because you can't keep going back. And, I've spent time in the studio with artists where we've spent 18 months on vocals. After a while, you're kind of going, the redundancy of this is we're just not going to get any better because we're in different environments. So you need to really work finding that best piece of work that you can early on. So you're avoiding fatigue and the other traps that go with it, including, spending a lot of money in the studio.
Exactly.
DPA microphones, I kind of want to segue for a minute. How many different models are there designed for different applications?
Yeah, good question. We typically like to break our microphones into two categories. What we call our larger diaphragm pencil condenser microphones. They're going to be small diaphragm to the rest of the world, but to us, a 19 millimeter capsule is large, because we also have a miniature line, which we're speaking into now, the lavaliers and so forth, and those are 5 millimeters, and we go all the way down to a sub-miniature series, which is 3 millimeters. So thinking about the various industries that we like to approach with our microphones, everything from theatrical and broadcast to film to live sound to studios, so we try and provide solutions across all of these fields to make everyone's job easier.
We're going to take a little break. When we come back, I want to talk a little bit more about the DPA line, and then I'm going to start talking about the clarity of recording and improving that environment. We got a lot to talk about here, so bear with us, everybody.
All right.
In the studio with us today, Paul Andrews, our guest, DPA Microphones, and guest co-host Sean Giovanni from the Record Shop Recording Studio.
This is Katie Long, owner of DIY Music PR, and you are listening to the Business Side of Music podcast.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Wow, I just joined the Music Starts Here community. This is a truly hidden gem for anyone in the music business. Whether you live in Nashville or anywhere else in the world, Music Starts Here is like a GPS for your music career. This is the place to be if you want to get advice and direction from some seriously talented musical people who have been where you want to go. Music news, events, and a great big community with resources for artists, songwriters, musicians, studio and tech, along with music business advice from pros in the industry, all on one site. Make sure you get your free profile now. Go to www.musicstartshere.org. That's musicstartshere.org.
You're listening to the business side of music.
Back in the studio, co-host Sean Giovanni, Record Shop Recording Studios with us today. Special guest Paul Andrews from DPA Microphone. Welcome back, guys.
Thank you.
Talking about improving clarity in recordings. Let's dig into that. Exactly what does that mean?
When I look at improving clarity in recordings, there's two things that I look at. I start with the source. So if we're speaking about recording an instrument, let's say we're recording an acoustic instrument. I'm very fortunate in Nashville to work with some of the best session musicians in the world, and they bring in some of the best instruments in the world.
Right.
And they have multiple options to choose from. So depending upon the sound that we're going for, or that the kind of idea that I have in my head, there may be a certain, if we speak on like acoustic guitar, for example, there may be a certain guitar that they have that has a darker quality, a brighter quality, warmer quality, a more weathered kind of sound to it. And so I'll tell them on the front end, this is the kind of sound that we're going for, and we'll start with that. If that isn't getting it there, I listen to the instrument first in the room, and then we'll try out a couple different things until we find the right one. Same with drums, for example. We'll switch out snare drums, we'll switch out cymbals, we'll switch out the types of sticks that we use until we find the sound and the tonality that we're looking for.
So I want to stop you right there. Switching out sticks. I don't think I've ever heard that one before.
Yeah, well, between having traditional drumsticks or brushes, it's called like smash sticks, or it's a bunch of little sticks taped together.
Gotcha.
Can definitely change the dynamic and the attack of the drums depending upon the sound that you're going for. Okay. Or even doing something like with mallets and putting blankets over the drums, and it can significantly change the type of attack that the drums have and the way that they resonate and that sort of thing.
Gotcha.
So that's where I start, at the source. And then the next step is the microphone. That's the next thing that's being captured. So then as we talked about previously about microphone placement, we'll start by using the microphone that I think is going to give me that sound that I'm going for, and then move the placement around until I get it. If it's not there, then I switch out the microphone until it's there. And then you just kind of go through that process.
Yeah.
The one other thing that can change clarity is the way of they're playing. So you may have something, if it's an acoustic instrument, that may be played with a pick, might be finger picked, might be a certain dynamic they're playing with, or changing the register in which a part is being played, or the voicings. So those are all things that I use as a producer and engineer to adjust the clarity of the recording from the source, what's happening. Then we get into the capture of the clarity of a recording, and I think that's where Paul has some really great ideas.
Yeah, and I want to jump in there with DPA Microphones.
Okay.
You manufacture certain microphones for certain protocols. Is there a selection of drum microphones versus obviously vocal mics, but instrument amplification, recording how broad of a spectrum is that?
It's extremely broad. In fact, we take pride in the fact that we don't actually build microphones for specific purposes. So that same microphone that Sean likes to use on his overheads for drums, the 4011A, it has been Sting's main vocal mic for many years. So people don't oftentimes think of that, but that's part of the strength, I think, that DPA has to offer, in that we're just capturing accuracy. So no matter what the source is, you can put that microphone, on the snare drum or a guitar cabinet or a violin or a Formula One racing car or, whatever that happens to be.
Whatever the application is. Yeah.
Exactly.
So far, since I've had that pair of microphones in the studio, I got them because I tried them on overheads and the cymbals sounded the best that I had ever heard on overheads, and I was like, I need these mics for this. But then understood the transient response and the flat response of the microphone and the natural sound that it had, and I said, well, I got to put this on other stuff. So I started using it on acoustic guitar. And then a couple days ago, I put it on a steel guitar amp. I was amazed at the articulation of the steel part in comparison to some of the other microphones that would be like go-tos, in the past. We've also used it on violin and in a stereo pair for a string quartet. All of those things have got us amazing results.
When we talk about recording and especially improving the clarity, one of the things is the impact of, I guess, what we would call noise floor from equipment in the studio. It's something that is kind of a common denominator wherever you go. Mm-hmm. How do you fix that?
Well, you start with your space itself. So there's little things that cause noise, like computers, any sort of machinery, your air conditioning. Not everyone has the ability to completely revamp the air conditioning in their home studio sort of thing, Right. I think you look at the recording space that you have and you pinpoint where the potential noise could be coming from as it relates to just noise in your acoustic space, and figure out the best way that you can to minimize that initially, because that's going to be the initial thing that is going to be amplified by every microphone that you put up in the room if those things are happening. One of the ways that we do that with our B room upstairs, we have what's called an ISO box that a company called Sound Construction that's based here in Nashville makes. And you can put the computer and all the hard drives and the interface all in this box. You close it shut and it basically silences the noise from it. So it really quiets down the control room.
But you don't have to worry about heating problems with that?
No, it has a fan in it. So it has all the ventilation and it keeps it cool and keeps the temperature good for the equipment. I think that the other thing is making sure that you're keeping up on your gear. It's a challenging thing to do, especially in a studio like mine where we have a lot of equipment. There's a lot of variables that can start to cause noise. But if I don't fix a problem as soon as it starts happening, then pretty soon you got problems on multiple pieces of gear, and then half your stuff is out, and then you got downtime where you are forced to do that, and you got to bring in a tech and just clean everything up.
And you're losing money when you're down.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As soon as something goes wrong, I send it out and get it repaired immediately. It's always a pain because you're like, oh man, this is a cost that I wasn't expecting, but the cost that if you have downtime from it is going to be considerably more. So I pay attention to those little things. If there's some noise, if a knob is acting up, I want to get on it on the front end before it becomes a major issue. Same with microphones. Early on in my career, I didn't realize how important it was to service microphones on a regular basis. And I also didn't realize how to really care for microphones when they're not being used, making sure that they're always taken down, they're put in a box, not only put in a box, but also covered with something inside the box to really reduce the dust and the buildup that can happen on the diaphragm.
That's right.
And over time, you might not notice right away the lack of the clarity that is being taken away from the microphone just being dirty from use and just being out in oxygen. So I make sure that we regularly have our microphones serviced and looked at and repaired, not just when there's issues with them, but on a fairly regular basis, every couple of years. It's not something that you got to do every few weeks or anything, but good to take care of. Tube microphones. I've noticed that with our tube mics, they need some attention a little bit sooner because that noise can build up and you don't notice it at first. And there's been times where I've been in a session and I was listening at a low volume, maybe cutting a vocal, and then I get into editing and mixing and I throw some compression on there and crank it up. And I'm like, oh my God, we have this amazing vocal, but there's this hiss in the background that is driving me crazy and it's going to be noticeable, Luckily, we have some really great tools at our disposal these days to be able to mitigate some of that, but it's also detrimental to the clarity of the recording because if you're taking out that frequency, it's going to diminish that frequency in some other ways with the direct signal And then you move forward down the signal chain, look at your pre's, your compressor, your inputs, and as well as the cables that you're using, which can cause noise. And you never know when that's going to happen. We had a steel session, like I mentioned a couple days ago, and we have a tie line back in one of our ISO booths. And I had the cable that I used 2 days before on a tracking session that worked totally fine as a tie line. We plugged in the steel amp and noise. I was like, yeah, be kidding me. So we thought that it was probably coming from the steel, so we adjusted the pedal board and that sort of thing, and it was still there. So we just switched out the cable and noise went away. That cable is now getting sent out to repair. So those are things you never know when they're going to come up, and you always got to just have a good ear for them.
I want to jump back real quick to, we talked about it earlier, the small diaphragm microphones.
Okay.
The pros and the cons of a small diaphragm mic.
You think about the size of the diaphragm and the material that it's made out of and how it ultimately responds or needs to react to the stimulus, to the sound pressures, that are differentiating as it moves past the microphone. You think about that in and around, okay, the smaller the diaphragm, the microphone, the easier it is to excite. It inherently is going to be able to pick up transients much faster than, say, a large diaphragm. I kind of like to think of a small diaphragm as, say, being a sports car. It's fast off the line, it's got great brakes, and it can stop really fast, as opposed to a large diaphragm microphone maybe being like a locomotive train. It takes a lot of inertia to get that diaphragm excited and moving, but then it also takes a lot for it to stop. So you think about the differences there within. The sports car or the small diaphragm has the opportunity to not only accurately reproduce the transients that are taking place from the signal, but it's also recovered fast enough to the point that it's ready for the next one on time, as opposed to potentially a larger diaphragm, just because of the sheer mass, may still be in a recovery zone. So by the time that second transient hits, it hasn't quite figured itself out. It's not quite back into a state of rest. So what's happening is there's potential smearing or different artifacts that can take place after the fact. So this recovery that's taking place with larger diaphragms, in my mind, it's what gives larger diaphragms a sense of character. There's distortions and second and third order harmonics that are taking place in this residual or in this recovery zone, which is really neat, and that can be something that's very pleasing to the ear in one circumstance, but it can be something that may not be appropriate. So it's something that the end user just needs to decide, is this the sound that I'm looking for, or am I looking for something that is accurately reproducing as best as the technology is allowed?
Because when you're pushing air, which is really what it is,
right?
Those pressure levels, the SPLs, the microphone has to react to it instantaneously.
Right.
If you don't have the microphone of the device that, as you say, can react to what's coming out, then it does become deformed, doesn't it?
It can struggle with, the following transients or the following bits of sound that you need to capture.
And you never catch up.
Right.
Yeah. That's the thing we have to keep in mind there, too.
That was something that I didn't think about much until Paul introduced that idea to me, the speed of the diaphragm. And I'll give you guys an example. When we did our first kind of shootout of DPA mics, end of last year.
Okay.
Something like that.
Yep.
We came out and we did a live tracking session with a number of different artists with all DPA mics. And it was a great opportunity for me to experience their whole product line, and stuff sounded amazing. The biggest thing that I noticed, where I was literally sitting here in the chair and I turned around and looked at Paul and Evan and said, I was kind of baffled, right? And you were like, dude, we need to get that on camera because that is the reaction that people have when they hear the speed of the diaphragms of the DPA mics have. And they explained it to me. They're like, because I said, I don't know how to put this into words, but I feel like I can hear every transient in the waveform. I feel like the cymbals are so clear and the acoustic guitar is so natural, like it's just almost 3D. And their explanation of that was, well, the way that we've designed our diaphragms and the smaller and very light, so they can move quickly and get back to their resting place faster. And it totally made sense to me. I've never kind of thought about it that way, but I heard it initially. And now that I understand that more from a physics standpoint, I pay more attention to it in recordings when I'm switching out different mics, and I can kind of visualize what I'm hearing. in a way, when I'm making decisions about which microphone to throw on something for the specific purpose of the sound that we're going for.
Jumping to the materials that are being used in microphones, that's a critical part also, right?
Absolutely. Don't ask me too much about that because that's above my grade.
Right. But it's still, and as we said this earlier, garbage in, garbage out. So you really want to use the finest materials. It doesn't matter whether you're building an amplifier or a speaker enclosure or, an acoustic instrument or a microphone. You still want to have quality product.
Absolutely.
But for what you're saying, the smaller diameter is still...
Right. Now, you mentioned earlier some of the potential pros and cons within that. A lot of people have, I believe, to be kind of a misconception over small diaphragm microphones not being able to pick up low end. In a lot of ways, it makes sense because you think about, diaphragms are everywhere. Whether you think about a diaphragm on a drum kit, the high tom is going to not produce the same amount of low end as the kick. It's a smaller diaphragm as opposed to a subwoofer being 18 inches, the speaker is. So I can understand the mindset in that regard. But at the same time, I think about, we as human beings, if we haven't experienced any hearing loss over the years, we haven't attended too many Metallica concerts or whatever that happens to be at really high volumes, we can experience and enjoy low end all day long, right? That's why it's being produced, is for our enjoyment ultimately. Well, the diaphragms that we're working with organically, on either side of our head, the average human being is a 10 millimeter diaphragm. So you think about a 10 millimeter diaphragm can reproduce low end satisfactorily as we can enjoy it.
Yeah.
So why can't we do that electronically as well? So this is where DPA says, all right, we don't necessarily need to step into the large diaphragm world. In fact, we're able to capture just as much low end with, say, our 5 millimeter capsule, which is something that I do all the time. I'm taking our 5 millimeter capsule and I'm putting it on the outside of a kick drum. And let me tell you, it gives you as much punch in the chest as you can possibly want.
And that's the ultimate response that you want anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're going to take another break, get another word in for a couple of our sponsors, and come back. We're going to talk a little bit more with Paul Andrews from DPA Microphones, co-host Sean Giovanni here with The Record Shop, and you're listening to this edition of...
Hi, this is Brian Nutter with Nutter Guitars, and you're listening to The Business Side of Music.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Hi, this is Vinny Rebus, the founder of Indie Connect. Our goal is to ensure that you have the knowledge, the tools, skills, resources, and connections that you need to develop a profitable and long-lasting career in music. One way we do this is through these Business Side of Music podcasts. I'd also like to invite you to check out Indie Connect magazine, our free multimedia online publication packed with practical interviews and advice from music industry experts. Go to www.indieconnectmag.com. That's www.indieconnectmag.com. Let us walk with you and guide you every step of your musical journey.
You're listening to The Business Side of Music.
Back in the studio, co-host Sean Giovanni, Record Shop, recording studio here in Laverne, Tennessee. Thanks for letting us use your place today, by the way.
My pleasure. Glad to have you guys.
It's a cool facility. I think people get the chance to check it out. They should, because this is a very cool studio. You'd never think when you pull up that it was going to look this good. So
yeah, it's a great room.
Cool. Paul Andrews, DPA Microphones. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
We've talked about a lot of technical things, which is, I think, vitally important. And as I said during the break, I learn a lot when we do these. I learned things today I never even thought about. Let's talk about the DPA product line. You mentioned Sting is using a particular mic. Is that, when he does that for vocals, is that live or recording, or?
I can honestly answer yes to both. It started out...
Is it the same microphone?
Not today. It started out, as far as my memory goes, with a 4011A in the studio. This is what we would call one of our larger diaphragm microphones, coming in at 19 millimeters. He fell in love with the sound, and he came to us and said, I want to use this on stage, and I want to have the same sound. So we tried it, and with some success and with some ideas about how we could improve upon that, we came back to him with what we are currently calling the de facto microphone, which we have released. It's been out for several years now, but it's a fantastic handheld microphone that takes a lot of the same characteristics that we had in that 4011, making it more applicable for the stage. So we've changed the polar pattern a little bit. We've gone from just a standard cardioid over to a little bit more of a super cardioid pattern. We've taken the SPL handling capabilities up significantly. It can go to 160, so it can handle really loud stage environments. That's what he's using on stage today. So there's yes to both questions.
Gotcha. And then the 2028 vocal mic. Let's talk about that one for a minute.
The 2028, the little brother to the de facto. We just released this. This is at a very price-friendly point that we tried to come in with, understanding that we need to try and accommodate several different potential markets, and we want to be able to provide that DPA sound across the board in that regard. So the 2028, like I said, we just released that here maybe a month or two ago. It is the de facto in a non-modular version. It still has the same SPL handling capabilities. It still has all of the DNA of the de facto and what people know DPA to be, but in a friendlier price point.
Designed for live application over studio environment or both?
I think both. And this is something that, you think about the potential of having a microphone that is applicable in both scenarios. Let's say you're a lead vocalist of a band or whatever that happens to be, where you're accustomed to singing into a specific microphone and hearing yourself live on stage like that. Well, if you were to step back into the studio and it's not that same microphone, there's a little bit of reacquaintance that may need to take place because of the fact that this is not your microphone you sing into all day long, right? So now having the microphone that is applicable on stage but has all of the quality of a studio grade microphone that you can take into the studio and use that as well, it's the same. So there's no adjustments needing to be made on your part.
The best of both worlds.
I hope so.
Yeah. I think so. And there is no relearning curve, especially when you go into the studio.
Exactly.
Yeah, if we can use that word relearning.
Right.
But it makes a big difference, especially if someone historically has performed a lot on stage in live environments, then all of a sudden goes into the studio. Because the studio in itself can be intimidating.
Absolutely.
And now you're in this very clean, pristine, you can hear your heartbeat in some environments.
Right.
And then you get yourself in front of a microphone that maybe you're not comfortable with. It can change how you perform. So if you can be using that transition from live to recording with the same microphone.
Right.
Yeah, I think it would make the world a lot easier, at least for those of us that go into the studio.
Exactly.
Let's talk about the 4097, the choir mic.
Oh yeah, 4097, also a recent release, and this is something that we're super excited about. This is something that we wanted to introduce to fill the needs across the board, whether it be house of worship or whether you're using it for any other type of overhead application. The neat thing about this microphone is we've really paid a lot of attention to the decoupling that takes place because it is a floor-mounted microphone that has the base, the stand, the elbow, the boom arm, and the microphone at the end, all that being height adjustable. We wanted to make sure that the transmission loss would definitely be nulled out to the point that it's never heard by the microphone itself. So we put several safeguards in that regard. So from the base itself to the stand, it's decoupled. As you move up to the elbow itself, that is decoupled from the stand to the boom. And then as we move up to the boom to where the microphone is positioned, the microphone has been decoupled from the boom itself. So all of these stages really help in that. Not to mention, you think about choir situations where you've got the microphone where the choir is in transition and they're up and down, on and off of the risers. So there's a lot of potential foot stomping as well as physical contact. People may bump the microphone or something. So we wanted to make sure that mic would self-center itself back out so it just wouldn't sit there and vibrate back and forth as somebody bumps it for 10 minutes. And then we made it convenient enough that you can either go wired or wireless with it. So at the base, we have the appropriate clip adapters that'll let you clip in an XLR or your belt pack. So the transition of moving these microphones in and out of position can be a snap. Or if, one Sunday the choir is over here and the next Sunday the choir is over there, it's an easy thing to do.
Is this something you would also use in an orchestral environment?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Because of the fact that it's a really small footprint, you can get up overhead so you can actually capture whether it be the first chair or the violin, or you can capture, the ensemble as a group. The height adjustability, again, the small footprint, so it's not obtrusive if it's used in a live environment. The on and off axis frequency response. This is an amazing thing. And this, I think, is another strong suit of DPA and what we are bringing to the table and able to offer is the off-axis frequency response being so accurate, which makes it really important that even though you may be focusing on this particular violin player, the surrounding strings are going to be picked up just as accurately, even though they are off-axis to the microphone. And that, again, makes your job easier because it's all about the accuracy and what that ultimately sounds like to you.
How can people find out about DPA mics? Where can they go get the information?
Yes, dpamicrophones.com. We have one thing that I'm really excited about and I make reference to all the time, and that is the Microphone University, which is a tab on our website. Just look for it, kind of upper right-hand side of the tabs there, and we give you tips and tricks on just about every type of microphone technique that you could possibly use. How do I mic an acoustic guitar or a violin or a drum set or, whatever that happens to be. And we'll dive into some geeky stuff too and talk about, the physics of things and what you should pay attention to. But there's so many good articles in there. And like I said, I'm learning every single day and I'm making reference to this all the time.
Very cool. Paul, thanks for being on the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Sean, love being in the studio.
Yeah, man. Thanks for being here.
We're going to do this again.
Absolutely.
All right. Don't forget to check out our affiliates, including Lab Canna, fine hemp products since 2014. Click on their link on our website for more information and how to order their product line. If you're interested in getting your music into film or television, click on the Sync Songwriter link on our website. Absolutely the best way to get your songs listened to by top TV and film music supervisors. This is how you can get your songs quickly licensed for your favorite TV shows and movies. Click on our website link to get a free digital copy of Larry Butler's new rulebook for singers and songwriters, 101 Ways to Help Improve Your Chances of Success. Also, check out our other affiliate, Music Starts Here. You can find them at musicstartshere.org. Probably the best one-stop shop for the singer, songwriter, or aspiring musician who's relocating to Nashville or wants to. Last but not least, shameless plug for this podcast. Become a YouTube subscriber by going to the Business Side of Music page. You can hear all of our released episodes there. Also, check out our website at businesssideofmusic.com. Follow us on Facebook at the Business Side of Music Podcast and on Twitter at Biz Side of Music.
The Business Side of Music is the creation of Tom Sabella and Tracy Snow and is produced by Bob Bender. The Business Side of Music is recorded at Music Dog Studios in Los Angeles, California and Nashville, Tennessee. Production sound design by Keith Stark. Voiceover and promo by Lisa Busan.